So good afternoon, and as I said, welcome to this, our second bite-sized business briefing. These are the lunchtime briefings that we're doing throughout the summer on key topics of interest to our members and affiliates. So I'm delighted today to be joined by Fiona and Robert from Davy. I'm going to hand over to Robert in a minute just to introduce the team over at Davy. They're an affiliate of IFA, and we've been working with them for quite a while now, and delighted to do that. So we're recording this session. I will send the recording to you after, and we've just launched a new IFA member portal. It's rolled out from the senior leadership teams in IFA right now and over the summer and into the autumn. Be rolling it out among our members and affiliates. So all of our webinars will be up there to be able to view. So this will be one of those as well. Because in the interest of time, we're going to leave the questions to the end, but as the questions come into your mind, pop them into chat. Some people had put in pre-questions as well, and we went through them. Some of them are really specific in nature, so it's going to be hard to answer those kinds of questions. But what Davy have offered is afterwards, if anybody wants to contact me, to do a free chat with people afterwards, if there's specific things that you want to talk to them about. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Robert, and you can take it from there. Thanks, Robert.
Yvonne, thanks a million. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for your time today. My name is Robert Troy. I'm the head of Davy Life Sciences. In my role, I lead a team of financial advisors who provide tailored investment and pension advice to senior leaders and founders across the life science industry. Joining me on the webinar is my colleague, Fiona Haughey. Fiona is a director of financial planning in Davy, and today we'll outline some practical steps you can use to increase control of your personal finances. Before I pass over to Fiona, I just need to inform viewers that this recording is classified as a marketing communication in accordance with the European Union Markets and Financial Instruments Regulations 2017. It is neither investment advice nor an investment recommendation. This recording does not take into account the investment objectives, knowledge and experience or financial situation of any particular person and is not an invitation to invest. Davy manages discretionary portfolios in accordance with agreed investment mandates, and our advisory clients receive investments advice specific to their circumstances directly from their financial advisor. Now, that always rolls so beautifully off the tongue every time. Fiona, let's kick off and go straight into it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Vaughan, and thank you, Rob. Thanks for having us. So this is very much a bite-sized session, so I will try and get through it as quickly as possible. So, Yvonne invited us here to give this webinar, and why does your funding your financial future matter? Well, because it's on us, really. Generations before us, they may have worked for the same company their entire lives and sort of had this defined benefit scheme paying into retirement. But as people started living longer, that became too much of a liability for employers. Employers will only now do so much. And really, the onus is on us as employees or as business owners to really save while we are working for the future. Now, there is a state pension. It's only provides €15,565 per annum, which equates to just under €1,300 per month. Like, that is not enough for most of us to get by. And, very recent research came out of Royal London just last week, where, to give a comfortable retirement, most people on average believe that they will need around €40,860 per annum. That was the average figure that came out there. So it really is on us to plan, not just for next week, not just for next year, but down the line, thinking of ourselves. If we're fortunate enough to be in the rocking chair when we're in our 80s, thinking of ourselves and, how we want life to look like, and, will we have enough money to fund that? Hopefully most of us have pensions, but I will focus on pensions. But it's not just, financial planning is not just about pensions, but there will be a little bit about that today. And the onus really is on us, and to focus on what we can control. There's a saying, man makes plans and God laughs, but you do have to have some sort of plan so that your direction of travel is going to get you where you want to go. At Davy, we have a common concept that we discuss with our clients when we think about money. and we think about the purpose of that of money. So we categorize assets or money into three funds: security, lifetime, and legacy. So if we start out with security, that's the roof over your head, the shirt on your back, the food on the table. You take very little to no risk with these assets. And that's your first port of call. You know, saving for a home is often what happens when people start, employment, and ensuring that you have a rainy day fund. Typically, we recommend having about 6 months of expenditure in a rainy day fund. If you're married, we recommend that's in a joint account, or alternatively, just ensuring that both spouses have access to cash, just in event of, the car breaks down, or also in the event that the worst happens and, somebody passes away prematurely or becomes ill and is unable to work. Often PHI policies with employment take 6 months to kick in, which is generally why we have always hold back 6 months of expenditure in a cash liquid account that can be accessed immediately. Then once we have that boxed off, then you move to your lifetime category. And these are assets designed to meet lifetime goals for you and your family. The number one asset that we usually see within this category is pensions and retirement savings. And that's where, you're putting away money for the long term. Now, it's not just pensions. Education planning for young children could fall in here. And that's what we typically see. Saving for children who are young, like, you'd be surprised if you take a bit of an investment approach, because you have a long-term time horizon there. It takes such heat off if there's a few kids in college or private secondary school at the same time. So starting early, carving out funds designed for that specific purpose, really, really helps. And then once you've that boxed off, and the legacy category is assets that are designed to enhance your lifestyle or leave behind you to the next generation. We would see a lot of our clients use the small gift exemption on an annual basis. What that is, you can gift €3,000 to anyone else with no tax implications every year. There's no limit on how many people receive the €3,000. Just anything above that then comes into, the inheritance tax thresholds. So we would encourage a lot of utilizing of that if you do have assets within that legacy category. There's also we would do a lot of inheritance tax planning with our clients, just to minimize the effect that has. I did see Jack Chambers on a video this morning in the Irish Times that they are reviewing those inheritance tax thresholds, just given the environment that we're in. But we always just have to kind of work to the rules that we have at hand. And right now, we see that impacting our clients a lot. Also, philanthropy or charitable giving is quite popular with that legacy category. But really, we just sort of need to mentally account for the money that we have, the income that we have every month, into security and lifetime, and then potentially legacy. So that's just quite a common framework. We meet a variety of clients across the age categories, and what people need at different stages of life can be quite different. So Yvonne's come in with a question just on inheritance tax thresholds. I'll just explain that. So Group A is to a child, and that's €400,000. Group B is to another family member, and that's currently €40,000. And then there's a Group C, which is a stranger, and that's currently is it €20,000? So, or roughly in and around that. So, and just be conscious of cohabitants. Cohabitants actually fit into that Group C threshold, and so are treated as strangers in blood in terms of the Irish tax system. So that's just one thing to be mindful of, where people can be caught out because they're not married, and it's just the Irish system sees it very black and white. So that's what I mean by inheritance tax thresholds. In terms of people in their working life, capital accumulation is very important to people in their 30s, 40s, 50s. Here we see people, have their jobs, gain a good solid income, and perhaps employee share schemes would be a typical part of remuneration at that stage. We would always say just be mindful of ensuring that you're not putting all your eggs in the one basket. We always encourage that you increase your financial independence from that of the company that you either own or that you work for as much as possible. It just makes sure that you can stand on your own 2 feet. Now, I'm sure we've all heard about Enron and what happened there, where people were having stocks in Enron and then all their 401ks, i.e. their pensions, were all in Enron. And that's not an ideal situation to be in. So we always sort of say, go back to the wealth allocation framework. Have you provided for your security and lifetime categories? And then we're not saying that you need to sell down all shares or anything like that by any means, but that's in the nice to have. You can afford to hold that concentrated holding. As people get into their later years, they're thinking about retirement planning. Assisting children is a big thing that we see a lot. Financial protection is also incredibly important. I know I mentioned this before, but ensuring yourself is protected in the event that you become sick or unwell and unable to work, or that your family is protected in the event that you passed away prematurely. So it's really important to know what benefits you have through your employment, and having to think, would that be enough if the worst was to happen? Wealth preservation then in 60s and 70s become a bit of an issue. Grandchildren tend to come along and just helping those out. And then as we see people progress into their 70s and 80s, it's all about succession planning and really just about making sure that people don't want to leave a mess behind them. They want to have their affairs in order, make things as simple as possible, and to minimize tax leakage as much as possible, to see what they can do. I'm just going to take a step back and explain pensions and how they work. Ireland actually has one of the most complicated pension systems in the developed world, and there's a pension simplification process ongoing to kind of make things a bit simpler on the pensions front in Ireland. But when something's complex, people tend to sort of shy away from them. And so we do not have enough pensions coverage in this country. And as I was saying earlier, the onus really is on us. So how they typically work right now. A defined contribution scheme, you're employed, your employer will contribute a certain amount of your income to your pension, and you can contribute a certain amount of income to your pension. And there are certain tax efficient amounts that you can do that. So there's a limit. So there's a limit on a salary of €115,000. And the percentage then that aids your tax efficiency is dependent on your age. So if you're 35, you 20% of your salary up to 115,000 into your pension. So that would be €23,000 per annum. And then if you go upwards, if you're 55, you can put up to 35,000, or 35% of that 115,000, equating to about 40,250. So it's really about ensuring that you are putting enough in your pension. Some people think it's enough to put in 3% or 6% because that's what the employer will match. And they think that's a really good sort of saving strategy, but you're not actually getting the full tax advantage that you could be, because you're paying income tax on that remainder that you perhaps could afford to also put in as an employee contribution into your pension. So it's about really, I'd encourage maybe you sit down, you have a think about, okay, what's your monthly income? What can I carve out for my pension based on these percentages, which is the tax efficient limits? It's also really important to know your pension investment strategy. And I'll touch on this just a little bit. There's these lifestyling or default strategies if you haven't specifically picked what investments you want your pension to go into. What they typically do is they start out in your 20s, 30s, quite high risk, and they treat your investment time horizon as if it's the end is 60 or 65. So by the time you're 60 or 65 or whatever normal retirement age in that scheme, they've de-risked you to almost like, you know, cash bonds, very very conservative. And that's not necessarily what you want to be. You want to be in higher risk in your pensions because they grow tax-free. Also, when you're in retirement, you are required to take a drawdown from your pensions. You can go buy an annuity. That's option one. That'll pay you X% or X amount until death. They often have a spousal benefit built in. But option two, which is what we see more commonly, is taking an approved retirement fund, and from which you take a 25% lump sum. That's yours. You go do up the kitchen, you buy the new car, whatever it is, and then you put the rest into your pot, which is drawn down 4, 5, or 6% per annum, depending on your age or the level where it's at. I'm just going to touch on this. Starting early can be really, really key. So we have Yasmin, who's 28 versus 38. She's putting 6,500 into her pension between employer and employee. At age 68, if she had began at age 28, her pension would be 824,000, providing an income of 33,000 until 90. If Yasmin had started at age 28, or sorry, if she starts at age 38, then that's 453,000, only providing 18,000 per annum until age 90 from age 68. So you can see where 10 years here has a huge impact on the 30 years in retirement by starting early. Investment returns are also really important, and that goes back to my earlier point about just being mindful of default strategies and knowing what your pensions are invested in. So if I just focus on that 40,000, which is in and around the figure that most people think they need for a comfortable retirement on average. If your pension was to get 2% annualized return, you would need about 1.84 million. And if you were to get a 4% return, that becomes 1.6 million. And a 6% return, that becomes 1.4 million at the time you're age 65. So this is based on a 35-year-old starting today at age 65 and leaving like nothing at age 90. So investment returns can be quite important. So it's just about ensuring you know your contribution strategy to your pension and what it's invested in, and also going for growth, because it is a very tax efficient vehicle. In Ireland, there is a new scheme coming out in 2027, which will help the ordinary people save tax efficiently. But right now, it's just pensions. Pensions are the only tax break that we get in this country. So it's about ensuring that you could be a little bit surprised as to how much you need by retirement. And it's about putting as much as you can afford to away during your working life, just to ensure that you have the quality of life and retirement that you want. I'll finish up just before before I hand over to Rob and questions. But 3 key actions that I want you to take away from this bite-sized section. Financial protection, ensuring that you know what your HR policies are if you get sick and are unable to work, or if you pass away prematurely. Pensions, know your strategy, find out those portal logins, know what you're invested in, and assess your contribution strategy to see if you are availing of as much tax relief as you can possibly get. Pensions are your most valuable asset, and they really should be managed as such. And, you know, by the time you retire, they might be more valuable than your home, you know, so they're often sort of set and forget. And it is sort of set and forget for a little while, as long as you have a plan and you know exactly what you're doing. And then consider maybe investing for any surplus income you have above that at the end of the month. And you know, that can be a good way to build up for like those longer term goals like education funding, and you know, maybe if it's just for yourself. With pensions you can't access before normal retirement age, whereas long-term investing you can. And I'll hand over just to Rob there on maybe touch a little bit more on investing.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. So when people come into us, or with anyone, you know, they do the plans, they set out where they want to go, and then the question is, well, how do I actually do this? Like, what do I actually buy? Where do I actually put this money, or where the rubber meets the road? So there's by far and away the leading question we get is, where do I do? How do I invest my money? And a diversified portfolio is a really good place to start. So rather than making one big bet, a diversified portfolio spreads your capital across different asset classes, different sectors, and different geographies. So you're reducing your reliance on just one single outcome to grow your wealth. So quickly, just looking at this portfolio on screen, this is a very simple example of someone investing €100,000 in a diversified portfolio. Really, the source of most of their returns is going to be in green, is the equities, you know, providing their funds exposure to thousands of companies spread across regions, industries, and sectors. So you're not just relying on a particular sector. However attractive it may be at the moment in artificial intelligence, you know, it may not be. So the factor from a diversified portfolio, we don't know what will be the dominant theme in 10 years or 20 years. And for a large part of our wealth and pensions, we're just not prepared to make that bet. So alongside equities, you know, we encourage government and corporate bonds. You know, long-term bonds are a terrible investment, really, because they don't provide any inflation protection, but they provide stability and income to portfolios. The core reason of a diversified portfolio is that not all asset classes work in the same way. The most common example is the 2008 financial crisis. We saw a huge flight to safety that doesn't need to be explained to anyone, where traders sold equities across the globe and bought into government and corporate bonds. So at all times, there's a part of your portfolio working for you and your long-term time horizon. Hedge funds, you know, offer the portfolio an alternative source of return. These are uncorrelated to bonds and equities, so really good diversifiers. And gold can act as a really good diversifier too. Cash at the top today offers very little return, especially here in Ireland. So best to hold a minimal amount in portfolios. So a typical portfolio like this, you know, based on long-term capital market assumptions, you should expect to achieve over a long, you know, 15, 20-year time horizon, about a mid-single digit return. But the importance, it's a smooth return. So you're, by diversifying your capital, you're trading away the market highs for protection to give you really what most people are looking for, is a return that beats inflation over the long term and helps provide that income. Risk can be dialed up and dialed down. Again, another advantage of diversified portfolios. Someone might look at this, their own personal circumstances, and say, but this isn't taking on enough investment risk for what I want to achieve. So how do we find that balance? And that all goes back to the start of your plan. But this is it's a very good place to start for anyone considering. And that's us for today. You know, that is the bite size of what we do. Thank you very much. And I believe there's some element of questions, so happy to take some of on.
Okay, so I'm just going to go back into the originals. What people can do, if you want to type them into chat or just come off mic there, feel free to do that. I was just interested, Fiona, when you mentioned Jack Chambers on the radio this morning about inheritance tax. Do you get a sense that they're going to allow people to inherit more or allow people to inherit less?
Inherit more, and that's basically just because of the property values going up in across the country. So there's a lot more people now coming under the remit of inheritance tax that wouldn't have traditionally fallen foul of that and it's purely because of property, the value of the family home.
Yeah.
And it's just about trying to avoid situations where maybe, you know, it is suitable for a child or children to live in the family home, but they can't afford to because they have this huge tax bill associated with it. And then it's a forced sale. So I got the sense that they are definitely reviewing it. The budget is out on the 6th of October this year. So we will be keeping our eyes and ears peeled to see what happens on that front. I know there's also lobbying in terms of the budget about, you know, children versus nephews, nieces, and whatnot. If you look at the UK system, they have just, you know, you can give so much away to anyone, and it doesn't matter what relative, whereas Ireland, you know, has different tax thresholds per your relation to the person who is deceased. So I'm doubtful that will have changed come October, but hopefully, you know, the inheritance tax thresholds have upped and downed over the decades, depending on who's in power, who's in government, and you know the economic times that we've been in.
Kind of, as you said, not really fit for purpose at the minute because of property prices and people get hit with a tax bill that they knew nothing about. You mentioned as well this scheme that Simon Harris has been talking about. Are there no details of what that might look like, or will that be part of the budget in October, do you think?
I do think more information will come out, later this year. They are hoping for a go live date in 2027. So they were looking at sort of the UK model again and a Swedish model, and it sounds like they're going to go towards more of a Swedish model where you perhaps have a really nice tax. I don't know what the rate will be, but an advantageous tax rate on a certain amount of growth within your investments, and then perhaps revert back to, you know, a normal tax rate above and beyond that, to encourage people to save and invest. So no confirmed details as to what that is yet, and what that might look like, but it does look like there will be a certain cap in it going in, so you can't save $1 million. So I'm sure you're not going to be able to put $1 million or 500,000 into it in any one year. You know, it's going to be sort of sensible to encourage the typical Irish person to invest for their future.
Yeah, brilliant. There was another one that came up a little bit in the pre-submitted questions about combining pensions. So people have different employments, pensions from different employments. What is the best advice to combine or not?
Thanks for bringing that up, Yvonne. Yes, so, you know, we're all working in firms, and it's more common these days to swap jobs, and you perhaps over your working life maybe have worked in 7 or 10 employers, maybe even more. 9 times out of 10, our typical advice would be to combine. It's so much easier for simplification, for management of these assets, and often typically they're invested in separate or in the same strategies, like the world markets, and you can be paying multiple fees for the same thing. Where that's the 9 times out of 10, it's combine and consolidate. 1 times out of 10, if there is an issue where your pensions, you're approaching the standard fund threshold. Now there is a standard fund threshold of it's currently 2.2 million, and that's going to go up to 2.8 million by 2029. So if your pensions are approaching that, you might want to stagger retirements. So that's one thing where we might say, okay, it might actually be better to have 2 separate pots, but it only really affects you if you're at that standard fund threshold level. So typically our advice is consolidate, especially when you're in the accumulations, like especially if you're in the early days, you know, you don't need to be managing 5 different pension portals.
Okay, that makes sense. So there are a couple of more specific questions in the Excel spreadsheet, but what I will do is after this, I'll send out contact details for you guys so people can have that chat with you afterwards, and that is free charge, no charge on that. So just if they do have specific questions. Rachel just has one question before we leave, and I know we're over time. You mentioned the pension simplification process. Is there a timeline on this and what it might involve?
Yes, so as I was saying, the SFT currently is 2.2 million, and that is going up to 2.8 million, and that will be reviewed on a wage inflation factor post 2029. But essentially, they are actually simplifying. There was a massive project last year where there's all these one-member pension schemes within Ireland, and they have sort of built these master trust schemes so that people aren't in one-member schemes. So they're really trying to reduce the amount of one-member schemes that people have in Ireland. Now, if you're employed by an employer, you're likely part of the group schemes, and it's sort of that group scheme mentality that people want to that they're encouraging. And then there are things that maybe might affect us 20, 30 years down the line, such as in-scheme drawdown, where you do not have a concept such as an approved retirement fund. You accumulate within your pension and then you decumulate within the same pension to make it that little bit simpler. Other countries have that model. But the government have sort of taken the quick wins, and those have come into effect. But the longer term ones, I think, will need more scrutiny and more. Auto enrollment has also taken place that started in January this year, where you have to be part of a scheme. You have to be part of this My Future Fund. So that's where the government are really just trying to encourage people. You have to save for your retirement, because the state can only do so much.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm conscious of time. We're on 13:34, so we'll wrap it up there. Huge thanks, Fiona and Robert. I will share the recording, as I said, and please do feel free to follow up with the guys if you'd like to talk about a specific thing or an answer to a specific question that you do have. Again, thanks a million, and enjoy the rest of your day. There's a bit of sunshine out there at the moment, so nice to see you all. Goodbye.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Brilliant.
Thanks,
So
everyone.
much.
See you then.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.